Steve here from 4Runner Outdoors, and today we're going to show you how to make those rock sliders welded in to the bottom of your car out of this. Well, more than just that, but this is what I have left over out of making those rock sliders. So anyways, just 2x2 inch square tubing, some 3/16 inch plate, a couple measuring devices, angle grinder, and a flap disc, and of course I have a pretty sweet welder that I use, but you don't need anything that fancy, you just need a welder. And you can make some pretty dialed in rock sliders for your rig, and I'm looking forward to showing you how that all came together. Okay, first thing you're going to want to figure out is how long to make these guys, and that's a pretty simple equation. Now I'm going to be popping a 3-inch lift on here, so I'm going to be jacking this up and putting some bigger tires on. So the last thing I wanted to have happen was that the rock sliders come back too far, you're a little lower, and then the tire hits them. Do not want that hassle. So what you do, figure out the length of your rocker panel there. So in this case it's 72 inches, and I just take off 2 inches off each end. So we got 72 inches total, so these rock sliders are going to be 68 inches long. So I pull it back 2 inches from the front up there to the front of the rock slider, and then same thing down here, 68 inches brings me right to the back edge of that rock slider. So a couple quick design features here. Number one, I want this little angle here so that I'm not catching up on something. So it's like this at the back. It's also like that up at the front, so that as I'm rolling over things, I'm not going to create some pinch point that's going to come down hard onto a rock. I've also got it angled back at the front, obviously, because we don't want that too square. And I've also got it angled at the back here in case I end up having to back off something to go backwards. If I could come in and I got this straight out like that, like I was initially planning on doing, then if I tried to go backwards, I might slam into a tree that might be kind of stuck here if it came out on the kick out here and it got wedged in behind, and maybe my tires out a little wider because I got bigger tires down the road. The last thing I wanted to do is get wedged in on a tree here. I can't go backwards because the rock slider is going to hit it. So in this way I've got it angled so I can lever out of that pretty easily and bounce around it. So anyways, we're going to show you how to make all that with some photos and some videos they're going to kick in. But the material for this, I got six foot lengths of 2x2 inch square tubing. I think it was $15 a piece, so that was $60 for, was that $90 for those. The plate steel was $5 actually for the length that I needed for the plates and the gussets that go up underneath the rock sliders that attach to the frame of the vehicle. So that was hardly anything. I actually got this steel from the scrap pile out on a steel yard. So quite often they're going to give you the option of going in and buying the steel that they've got inside. That's going to be a higher price, but if you go out to the scrap area, you can usually get stuff for, here in Houston anyways, it's about 30-40 cents a pound. And so that works out. These are about 15 bucks a piece for a 6 foot length, and the plate was about $5. I went with 3/16 inch thick steel, pretty beefy for sure. I don't know if you need to go that heavy. Maybe an 1/8 inch would probably be sufficient, but I went 3/16 because that's what they had out there, and I want a lot of heft on those rocker panels. I'll actually put a picture up of the aluminum, what do they call them, running boards that come stock with the vehicle, and how we started to crunch that up just going over some light rock obstacles. So I'm happy with the way these turned out. I just put on some rust proofing paint and then hit it with some bed liner spray on top for a little bit more traction. This is my first welding project, and then I did the roof rack afterwards. So I think they came out pretty well, and as I go along I'll get better with the welding, and I'm sure you will as well as you're building stuff. But have fun, make it your own, come up with your own design. This is so strong. Like I can get right on here and crank on it. I can jack the entire car up with the rock slider. It just lifts everything up. It doesn't flex or bend or deflect at all. So these are going to be super strong to handle any kind of off-roading activity that we're going on. And I want to show you how to make this for very inexpensive, you know, not counting the cost of the welder. The setup here with this welder is about 700 bucks from Harbor Freight, and the tank is about 300, and maybe another 60 for the argon CO2 shielding gas, but totally worthwhile. I'm saving so much money making this stuff myself, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it. And hopefully I'll be able to take you through a little process, what I learned that worked, what I would suggest you do differently, and hopefully that works for you. Okay, so here's the square tubing that we purchased. I actually got six foot lengths of this and the steel plate. And this was my first design idea, is to have it kind of very similar to what we're doing right now, but the back end of the rock slider was going to be a lot squarer. And I had an issue thinking that, okay, if I wanted to back up, I've really got just like a battering ram here. I'm not going to be able to back up into things. So I wanted to change the design from being square at the back to have more of an angle, so that if I had to back up into something, it would actually push the vehicle over as I reversed into a tree. And that made a lot more sense to me. So just flipped a couple of these bars around, actually took that long one that you saw there that created the biggest length of the back kickout and just put it into the very back of the kickout, and then just flip that shorter bar around and put it into the side there. So actually really simple to do, but this worked out really well. One of the issues that I had though was creating openings at the end of these tubes that I needed to clean up or cap off, because I don't want anything to be open. So on the bottom half here, I cut this off to have better travel over rocks at the front and the back end of the slider, but I still had an opening in there that I had to cap off. And you're going to see in the next slide here that what I did initially is I cut out these little pieces of 3/16 inch steel and I fit it right into the opening, which I thought was going to be great until I went to go weld it. And then I had a big issue because I couldn't fit it really perfectly, and I was blowing out the wall of the tube a bit here and there. So on some of them, that's what I did. But on the big length there, what I did is actually capped the thing. Rather than putting an insert in, I ended up putting in the cap, because trying to weld in the insert wasn't working as well as the cap. So when I finally finished it, I don't think I have a picture of it, of the actual cap, but really all I did is I just cut out a whole length of steel from the 3/16 inch plate and just put it down the length of the rock slider there. On some areas I just put it on the cap end of it, and on that kick out there I just put it down the whole length of the kick out, because it made it look a lot better, it made it stronger, it made it easier for me to weld, and I just ground it down a little bit so that it actually was a little a little tighter. So I'll pop a picture up of that too, so you can see the final part of that, because that worked out really well, super easy to do, and I was really happy with the way that looked. Hey, Steve here of 4Runner Outdoors, and going to give a quick update on the sliders that we're getting ready to put on the 4Runner. And tacked them up yesterday, started to do some welding, and it's coming along nice. I'll show you a little bit about that, and then we're going to do a little time lapse on setting up the other slider here, or getting that ready to rock and roll. Anyways, here's what we did yesterday. I can't believe how heavy this is. It feels super heavy. It's probably just awkward. It's only 50 pounds, but it feels like it's a lot heavier. And I actually did a little search online on how much 3/16 inch square tube, 2-inch square tubing is, and it's about for a foot it's 4.3 pounds. So it makes sense that this is about 50 pounds, and so we pulled the scale out and measured that. That's what it was. So what we did is just tack some, put some tacks on here and made sure it's all level, put some clamps on there. I'll show you that when I do the other one. I've got a flux core set up right now with a titanium welder, but I ordered a gas argon CO2 bottle, so we're gonna finish it off with the MIG welder. But anyways, this is coming along really well. So we got this is gonna be the bottom part of the slider. As you can tell, I've tried to get the seams on here. And yeah, it's looking good, nice and tight, super strong, even with the flux core welds. But I'm gonna do the rest of the welds all in MIG welding, because I think it's gonna be nicer. Super strong the way it is. It's just, I think it's gonna look a little nicer if I can lay down some MIG welds rather than the flux core. I've already started to sand off some of the little splatter marks here. But anyways, I'm gonna set up the camera, do a little video on how we're putting this together. I got a bit of a template here. So this is going to be the underside of it because we've got the angle here. I almost forgot to do that yesterday. It just sort of occurred to me if I build it the exact way the other one is, this tube here is going to be in the wrong orientation. So anyways, we're just going to lay everything down here. You'll see that in a bit, and we'll pop it all together, put some tacks in there, and then clamp it and measure as we're going along to make sure everything is on point. Anyways, back soon. So I wanted to keep all the angles really simple, and I just kept everything at a 45 degrees. So the little angles at the bottom of the rock slider that you can see on the end of the main rail, that's the inside rail that goes underneath the rocker panel, I guess, of the car. You can see I got those cut at 45 degree angles, and then all the supports that connect the outer rail to the inner rail, they're all cut at 45 degrees as well. I just wanted to keep everything simple. So it might have been a little stronger to keep those two center supports that are near my hand there on my left hand straight, but I thought it would look better being at an angle, 45 degree angle again, and the same thing for the cutout, the kick out there. So what I did is I actually made the middle part about 2 inches, or 4 inches rather, apart. So the tube is 2 inches, then I got a 4-inch gap in the middle, then I have a 2-inch outer rail, and then the kick out extends out another 2 inches. So the inside part of that outer kick out is level with or even with the outer face of the outer rail. So kept it really dialed in. I thought that looked really good, and then that just also made it really easy to cut everything and put it all together. So once that kick out got done, then I was able to make that a little bit longer than initially, but you can make it even longer if your rocker panels are longer, or you can move the forward part of the kick out a little bit forward. I just wanted most of it to be the normal size rail and not as much kick out. I could have made the kick out a little longer if I changed the angle, but again, I wanted to keep that at 45 degrees as well. I certainly didn't want it at 90 degrees, which was my initial design. And then once you're doing your angles, make sure you get them really tight. I didn't have a chop saw or a miter saw. I probably should have had something like that, but angle grinder worked well. Just make sure you're marking your measurements really, or you're marking your cuts really well, and you're just careful with the cutting and then the final grinding and sanding down. I found a cubic zirconia flap disc worked really well for taking off material rather than aluminum oxide. So the blue flap discs are just really aggressive when it comes to taking off material, and they last a lot longer as well. And so that's good. And then the other thing, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a blue scrubby type brush that I put on my angle grinder, and that worked really well to taking the mill scale off the steel tubing. So I'll put a link to that as well. And one of the things that I also mentioned was the inserts, so the capped ends of the tube. You don't want to cut out a little insert and put it in there to try and weld that. That was just really difficult. So what I found afterwards is if I just cut out a square piece of steel, I think it's 2 inches square tubing, but if at an angle there, it comes out to be about 2.5 inches. So it's 2 inches in height, but 2.5 inches long. You cut out a cap like that, and you just pop it right on the end of the tube. You'll measure it, obviously. That worked a lot better, but then you need to account for that extra 3/16 of an inch cap that you're putting on your tube. So account for that when you're making your measurements. But that made it a lot easier to weld up for sure. That's absolutely true. When you're tacking it in place, make sure everything's level. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just measuring to make sure that the outer rail is parallel to the inner rail. And I was going to have to just move things around to make sure that happened. That's easy to do because you can have your angles saved for your supports cut properly, but if you just press on them a little bit, it just sort of changes the angle a tad. And if you press a little bit too hard on one end of the rail, it'll push it in a couple millimeters, or imperial, like 1/8 of an inch or whatever, and then something just doesn't look right. So making sure you got them really parallel is super important. And then when you're tacking that into place, clamp everything up really well, make sure your joints are tight, and it's going to make it a lot easier for you when it comes to tack welding it and then doing the final weld. And because it's tubing, you just got to be careful that you're not going to blow through the tubing. So the tighter you can keep your joints, the less likely you are to blow through the tube, because you're not going to get an awful lot of arc. is going to jump in there and create an issue. So that's one thing that I learned, and it just, if you can just stay on top of your angles, make sure that you're keeping things nice and tight, that's going to make things a lot different and a lot better for you in the long run. Just about to clamp that all up and start tacking it together, and then I remembered I gotta sand down the inside of the angles of the rock sliders because I'm not going to be able to get in there later, so I want to be able to do that. So I got to take it apart and do a little flap disc on some of the inside faces. I'll do the rest of it later because I got some stuff coming later today that I think will work better. But anyways, that's what we're up to right now. So here we're looking at figuring out, okay, what angle do I want these rock sliders to be at? I know sometimes I see them, they're pretty angled up. I think that's better for clearance. I just don't like the way it looks when it's really high. So I've seen between flat, just 0 degrees of angle, or up to 20 degrees. I settled on 5 degrees. So what I did is I just put them up on the jack stands there, angled them around, looked at it, decided how I liked the look of it. Thought, hey, that looks really good. What is that? I took my iPhone and put down this little measuring, leveling thing, and I just put it on level, angle, put it down on there facing the car, and it gave me 5 degrees. I was like, okay, yeah, 5 degrees is what I want. So then I took the rock slider back into the house, had the extension arm that I cut out to give me the right length between the frame and the rock slider, and I just tilted that up till it was 5 degrees. And then I let it back down, and the distance that was from the rock slider is how much I needed to cut out on the top part of that extension arm, which gave me an angle. And then when I mated it in together with the rock slider, that actually, when I put the extension arm flat up against or perpendicular to the frame, that angle now caused the rock slider to come up a little bit. So it actually worked out really well. Super simple to do. It was, I think, 4 millimeters over 2 inches. That actually I just had to shave off from one side and angle that down to the other side, so it just perfect level, made things work really smoothly. And I just did the same thing for the other rock slider, and that worked out really well, so I was pretty happy with that. Hey, they're almost done. Got it all welded together, and little touch up here, a couple little splatter marks, and got a bit of a bulb here on some welds, and touch that up. Wipe it down again with some Varsol and prime and paint it, and then get it installed. And for the painting, once everything was all done and cleaned up, wiped it all down really well with Varsol, put nitrile gloves on so I didn't get any oils from my hands on the metal, and used a self-etching primer that worked really well when I was doing the wheels. Did that again here. And then on top of that, I put 2 coats. So I did 2 coats of self-etching primer, let each coat dry for a few minutes between each coat. And then after a few, like 10 minutes, I went right into the enamel. So I used a Rust-Oleum flat black enamel spray. Did 2 coats of that. And then I did a coat or 2 of bed liner spray on top of that. And what I think I'm probably going to be doing over time is just every once in a while jumping up underneath there, taking a look. If I see rust starting to pop up, because this is not powder coated, I think even with powder coating, I'm going to be scraping this stuff off, so it just doesn't make sense to me to powder coat it, because painting, it's gonna, whatever I put on there is going to get scraped off with rocks and rock chips coming up from the road. I'm already noticing that that's happening. So one of the things I'm going to be doing is just every once in a while taking a blue Scotch-Brite pad on my drill, scuffing it all up, making it rough, and then just hitting it with some bed liner spray or Rust-Oleum flat black paint just to keep touching it up. I found if I put a piece of cardboard on top of the rock slider, between the rock slider and the body of the vehicle, I can spray up from the underneath and catch that really well, and then just lift the cardboard up without taking it away from the vehicle, spray down onto it, and that allows me to cover the rock slider really quickly and easily, and keep touching it up because it's going to get scratched up, and if I just leave it, it's going to get rusty. Not the end of the world, but I want them to last and keep looking pretty good. So that's what I've been doing, or what I plan on doing, and that's how I painted these up, and it worked out really well. It came out with a really nice finish. So here I've just finished pulling the rock sliders off because I had to get in there and figure out, okay, where am I going to weld this on? So I need to grind off the paint in order to make sure I've got a good connection onto the frame of the vehicle. And as you can see, the X-ray system is there. I popped that off, unbolted it, popped the clips off, and those lines are surprisingly bendy, so you can really move them out of the way if they're in your way. Move them up, bend them out, and then when I was done, I just popped a zip tie in there, and that clamped them up pretty good once I'd done welding everything in place. Great, so we got finally to the welding onto the frame stage. And I gotta admit, I was a little freaked out here because I obviously never welded anything onto my vehicle before. So I wanted to make sure I didn't mess anything up. I'd read in places that they tell you to disconnect the negative terminal of the battery, and ideally try and keep your ground as close to your welding as possible, which obviously makes sense because you're gonna get a better connection that way, but also you're less likely to mess things up. So those are two recommendations that I would make when it comes to safety on your vehicle. Number one, disconnect the negative terminal of your battery, which was a bit of a hassle because every time I plugged it back in, the alarm would go off. I'd have to be ready with my key to turn the alarm off. But anyways, that worked out well. And then the second thing is just keep your clamp as close to as possible to where you're welding, so you're creating less chance of the arc going anywhere else in your vehicle. But which is fine because I'm just trying to do it in this one area here. Couple things to keep in mind. When I was leveling the vehicle, or the clamps up there, rather the rock slider, to get the clamps into place, because I want to get as tight of a connection as possible. These were nice big beefy clamps, but I'll tell you right now, they were actually too big because there's not a lot of room up there, and it would have been better with actually smaller clamps. So the frame itself looked like it was about 2 inches deep. These are like 5 or 6 inch clamps, too big, because the angle, or the extension of the arm for the clamp was just too long. I couldn't really get it into the inside of the car on this one here, and in the outside it's actually hitting right up against the inner rail there of the rock slider. So if you're going to do this, get clamps. Super important because you want as tight of a connection on that plate as possible to the frame, so you're actually getting a much better continuity of the weld electricity that's going on. I don't know what all the terminology is, but you want a nice tight connection because you're way less likely to blow through that frame wall if you've got a nice tight connection. Thing to keep in mind too, when you're welding different thickness materials together, you got to be careful because the plate that I'm using is 3/16 of an inch thick, but the frame material is only about 1/8 of an inch thick. So if you go with the setting on your welder that you would normally do if you're doing 3/16 to 3/16, you're going to have too much energy in there and you're going to blow through the wall of the frame. Don't want to do that. So dial things down a little bit. If you can, get some 1/8 inch thick material that's the same thickness as your frame. Practice welding some scrap 3/16 inch steel onto that and make sure you're getting the right settings. That's one big thing I would make sure you do there. The other thing, to get the rock slider level, what worked really well for me was to actually get because I wanted to do it was like a 1/2 inch gap between the top of the rock slider and the bottom of the pinch weld on the vehicle. What I did is I took it off after to start welding because I don't want all that heat next to all this wood. But I put a big strip of wood across the whole length of the rock slider. Really, you just need it above the extension arms to make sure that you're keeping that consistent gap. And then that way, what I did is I just jacked the whole the whole rock slider up into that piece of wood. And then once it was up at that level, the extension arms were parallel to the ground or perpendicular to the frame. Then I just clamped it tight onto the frame. And I have my plates here. You can see where the clamp is. I had them level with the bottom of the frame, so it made it a little easier to weld. And then really all I did then is just clamp it nice and tight, make sure I got a really good connection. Had my gas set properly because I think initially I was welding and I was getting some weird sparks, and I was thinking my gas was a little too low, and that was probably what happened. So I just made sure I cranked that up a bit. So check that regularly if you think your welding current is off a little bit and it's just not working like it did. Maybe your gas level has changed. And so keep an eye on that. Make sure you got a good nice tight clamp. Pop the whole rock slider into place by using block supports above it to give you a good consistent gap between your whole rock slider along the length of your vehicle there, and then you just go in there and start welding. Had a nice little stick there at the end from getting my nozzle too close to the weld. But yeah, it worked out great, and I was pretty happy with the result. Hey, so excited. Finally got all these done and had them on for a little bit, but they are working great. Just wanted to show you. You can totally jack this whole car up with the rock sliders. It's working awesome and super strong. I can just totally lift this whole thing up. I love the design features of it. That's working really well for me. So, you know, I mentioned before we get this 5-degree upslope here, so that worked out really well. Pretty simple to do. Just as I mentioned before, we just sort of put the rock slider flat on the ground and just tilted up the extension arm 5 degrees. Figured out, okay, what different gap does that create? You know, if I push up the extension arm and then tilt it 5 degrees, that kicks out the bottom, and then when I drop it back down, what's that gap? I think it was like 4 millimeters. What's that? Gosh, 3/16 of an inch, I guess, almost. And then so I just cut that angle on the extension arm, and then when I put them up against the rock slider and welded them into place, then that created that 5-degree angle that I wanted. And then when I just put them flat up against that plate and put them into the vehicle or frame, then that gave me the 5-degree slope that I was looking for. So that worked out great. The finish is holding up really well. It's super durable, so that's the couple coats of primer, couple coats of rest paint, and then some bed liner spray on top of that. So one of the things I'm going to keep on top of, because this is a rock slider, it's going to get scraped up. I am not going to be babying this thing. One of the things I'm going to be making sure that I do is just get under it regularly and hit it with a blue Scotch-Brite pad, and then just hit it with some spray. If I got a cardboard sheet above it, I can spray it from underneath and not paint the side of my car, which is what I'm looking to do. And then after I welded things in, put some more spray, and actually I think I may have did a first coat with a brush. You just pushed that all in there, got a really good coat around the weld and the grinding that I took out on the frame. And then here's the X-ray system that you can see. So I just zip tied that up into place for now. Cannot wait to get that 3-inch lift in. We're going to get some Falcon APT3W, whatever tires, 285 17 R70 70 R17. So, and I didn't want to wait until I got the lift and the tires to take out the X-ray system, so I just left it in place. But these tubes are surprisingly bendy, so if they're in your way, if you've got them on your car, just move them up out of the way. If they're in the way, like I got gussets here that I put into my rock slider to give it a little bit extra support. Just bend those tubes up out of the way, and if you just do it slowly, you'll be able to get away with it. It's not a big deal. Anyways, that worked for me, and I was pretty happy with it. But like how they turned out, they're super strong. I can jack up the entire car with this thing. If I need to, I've got the high lift jack over there, so we'll be bringing that on our trips. I can totally just kick that right up onto the rock slider and lift it up with that, because that's an awesome jack point for this vehicle. Makes it really easy to lift the whole thing up. And yeah, super happy with how it turned out. Love the angles. I love how easy it was to paint, or to cut up with the 45-degree angles, because that just made making it pretty simple. The X-ray is, it's one of those things. And I just got to stay on top of it with paint and make sure it doesn't get all rusty over time, because it's going to get scratched up with rocks, and rocks are going to kick up from the tires, going to come up and chip underneath it, I'm sure. So just going to make sure I stay on top of that. But yeah, pretty happy with how it turned out. Pretty excited for my next project. I know the roof rack worked out pretty good. I think next is a rooftop tent for the roof rack, so we can hit some camping. It's Houston, Texas, a little rainy today, but through the summer it's too hot and humid to go out, but in the fall we're totally interested in kicking out to the outdoors and getting some camping in, mountain biking, and gosh, what's next? I got skid plates. I think I'm going to make some skid plates. We ground up these pretty good on a rock not too long ago. I think these are more like tin plates, they're not skid plates. But I'm going to do full length skid plates down the whole length of the vehicle. Get gas tank as well, rear diff, maybe lower control arms as well. So yeah, I got to get a plasma cutter for that. So yeah, subscribe to the channel if you want to see some of those builds. We're gonna have fun kicking all that stuff in and figuring out how we go through all that in the process. So have a great day. Thanks for watching the video. Appreciate you. And if you have any questions or comments, throw them down below. Happy to get back to you. And I learn stuff all the time from talking to people. That's how I've learned. I didn't know how to weld 2 months ago. So this is just jumping into it and practicing and getting better at it as we go along. So have a great day. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your 4Runner. Cheers. Bye.